Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great, thank you. I just wanted to give people time to come in a little bit late, but I think we could get started. It's about 3:05. My name is Gina Lupino. I'm the project lawyer at Pleo, and I'm pleased today to introduce Samantha Douglas. She's going to talk to us about the Land Owner Transparency Report, which I know nothing about, so I'm really excited also to learn a little bit about this. Before we get started, we just want to acknowledge that we're located on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. We work through the province of British Columbia and across Canada, making a practice of learning from and engaging with the First Nations upon whose lands we work. So today's presentation is done with the support of the City of Vancouver. It's going to be about 30 to 45 minutes. We just ask that everybody hold their questions. You can write them down in the chat window, or you can just hold on to them at the end. We think that might be just the most efficient way of using Samantha's time. And we have a feeling that people will have a lot of the same questions. So if we do get pressed for time, we're going to put together some materials for you to all access after the seminar. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to hand the mic over to Samantha.
Thank you, Gina, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today to talk about the Landowner Transparency Report. So in my presentation, I'm hoping to cover all general questions in terms of what is actually being filed for the report itself, any information regarding whether you're required to file the report, or if there are any consequences for not filing. So I'll just get started with indicating as of November 30th, 2020, this is a new requirement to file with the Landowner Transparency Registry. And so we refer to the LOTR. And so all pre-existing owners of land are required to file by November 30th, 2022. And this has to be done through a lawyer because there are specific filing requirements on the Land Title Registry website. Right now, there isn't an existing obligation to file a transparency declaration, which is a different report that needs to be filed whenever there is a transfer of interest in property. So you don't have to worry about that right now. We're just focusing on getting all of the reports entered for pre-existing owners.
So I'll just move this over. All right, so why is this report required? So the BC government wanted to address concerns about housing affordability as well as money laundering issues. So what they've done is they've created this report, and the intention is to expose any hidden ownership in order to crack down on any tax fraud or loopholes. So luckily, originally the deadline to file this report was November 30th of 2021. So we're coming up to that date, and everyone was scrambling to get these reports submitted in time. Luckily, the LOTR has granted an extension to 2022. So now all pre-existing owners have time to better familiarize themselves with the report and their requirements. So I'm going to be talking about filling out the report in terms of whether you are a reporting body. Some of the most common types would be a corporation, a relevant trust, or a relevant partnership. Most, but not all, corporations, partnerships, and trusts are going to be required to file a report. So it's definitely a good idea just to check in with a lawyer and see if you are required to file. So some of the requirements would be if you own land, if you have a life estate in land, or if you have a lease agreement where you don't actually own the land, but that lease is running for a longer period than 10 years. There is an exemption for Indigenous land and prescribed land. A report is not required for those types of land. So in terms of a partnership, this is referring to a business partnership where people are carrying on business together with an intention of profit. It's not referring to those who are married or in a common law relationship. So I get a lot of questions about whether this would apply to someone's home, and this would not be a report that you're filing in terms of just a couple owning a house. This is looking for those corporate bodies that are owning land and trying to suss out who has an interest in that ownership. So if an individual or a reporting body chooses not to file, there are fines that can be imposed, and this can be up to $25,000 for individuals or $50,000 for a person, for a corporation or an entity, or it can be 5% of the assessed value of the property. So quite steep fines in terms of not completing this report. And after filing the report, there is an ongoing obligation to be filing updates. So within 2 months of a change in ownership to the property or any changes into interest holders, and I'll be referring to those later on in this presentation, there is a requirement to update the report and make sure that everything that the Land Titles Office has is up to date. So with regards to interest holders, when you have a reporting body that's filing a report, they need to check and see if there's anybody that owns 10% or more interest in the actual corporation, society, or housing co-op. And if there is somebody like that, they would be an interest holder under the Act. Another inclusion under the definition of an interest holder is if somebody has the ability to appoint or remove directors. They want to see that anybody that has these major decision-making abilities, that their information is included in the report and that there's that full disclosure for the LOTR. So this is a screenshot of the actual website itself, and I just wanted to take you through how we would complete a report and give you a better sense of what information is required and where this will be in terms of filing. So the first thing is logging into our LTSA account. And in there, we're going to be able to see all of the reports that have been submitted, and we'll be able to create a new report. So after that, there is a file reference, which is just for our purposes, keeping track of all of the reports filed. And then generally, when it's asking whether this report is a new report or it's updating, for our purposes right now, it's generally the new report. So we would say no. And then here we would be updating any included title numbers. So we would be including the title numbers of all properties owned by the reporting body or charge number. And so that would be the registered number on the title search of a lease, as I mentioned before. So in terms of a relevant corporation, what we would do is we would check off that this is the type of reporting body filling out the report. We'd enter the name and address of the actual reporting body. And they also want to know the jurisdiction of incorporation. We also require a CRA business number. So this is typically a 9-digit number that's provided by the CRA. So this won't be something that your lawyer can look up on your title search or your corporate summary. It'll be something provided by your tax authority, and we'll need it for the report. And then we'll also include any incorporation number that's relevant. So this is where we get into interest holders. So if there aren't any interest holders, it makes the report much simpler. We just have to include a statement that indicates that there aren't any interest holders. So I've used a co-op as an example, and what we would look at is their rules to make sure we know how they appoint or remove directors, and that nobody has a unilateral ability to do any of those actions. we'd be looking at their membership list and really determining whether or not anybody has 10% or more interest in the property itself. However, if you do have interest holders, say you only have 2 shareholders in your company, you're going to be required to ask those specific individuals for their legal name, their Canadian citizenship information, where their principal interest residence is, and their date of birth. You'll also need their individual tax number, so their SIN number, and you'll also need to indicate whether or not they have 10% or more interest, or if they are an interest holder in terms of some other right or power that they have in the reporting body. So you can see that for a reporting body that does have interest holders, the requirements are much more onerous in terms of getting this information from each and every individual that's involved. And finally, once the report's completed, we generally have 2 certifiers sign the report. Now, there is a requirement in the Act that once a report is completed, it must be signed in wet ink. So what our firm does as practice is we'll send this completed report out to the reporting body, have individuals, authorized directors or signatories sign the report itself, and then we only require a copy back in return to file it with the Land Title Office. So in terms of accessibility of the report, the public can search for parts of these reports. Some information like birthdays and social insurance numbers are not going to be publicly available. However, regulators and tax authorities, they will be able to search these reports and have access to all information filed. Now, some individuals, especially interest holders, where there is more personal information being demanded to be included within the report, they might take issue with this. And so they do have an ability to make an application to the administrator and request that all of their information be withheld from a public search. So generally, once the report is filed, you would indicate to an interest holder that it has been filed and let them know that they have this opportunity to make an application and seek some additional privacy if they have a concern. So these are some of the resources. I've got the general help website, which has a great frequently asked questions section. The Government of BC website has the enforcement and fine information, as well as the Act and the regulation, which are encompassing the obligations of filing this report. So at this point in time, I'm happy to take any questions and try to help out as best I can.
Okay, thank you so much, Samantha. That was really thorough and really informative, but also really concise. We do have a bunch of great questions. And we have one hand that's raised. So let's start out with the person who has her hand raised, and then we'll go through some of the questions. I think some of them might have been answered, but we have some time, so we can run through them again. The first, a woman named Bonnie McDonald had her hand raised. Bonnie, if you can you unmute yourself and let us know, or type in the chat, let us know if we've answered your question, or if you still have an outstanding question or you need help with something. And I don't see anything. All right, so we can move on. Then we'll go through the questions. I'm going to try to do it from the first to the in chronological order. And if when we conclude and I skip over a question, please feel free to let me know. I guess the first burning question that everybody has is, will this PowerPoint be available to everybody?
Yes, I believe Pleo will be uploading it after this presentation. So I will touch base with them and provide a link for access.
Okay, great, thank you. The second one is, who's required to file again?
Who's required to file? So that would be any corporate interest holder, anybody as a trust or a partnership that has an interest in land. So if you have a lease or you own property, it's best to get in touch with a lawyer and see if this applies to you.
Okay. Third question. Do you expect that many, if any, BC co-ops will need to file the report? And do they need to collect and send in members' personal information?
Great question. So generally co-ops do have to file this report. And what we ask from co-ops specifically is an outline of their membership list. So we need to do a tally to see that there's individuals that do not hold more than 10% interest. We also need a copy of their rules just to see how directors are appointed or removed. And on that membership list, we also need to know if there are any family or relationships between different units and different members that might affect voting as well. So as we get started in filing the report, we would send out sort of an outline of the things that we require, the documents to get started, and then we can go from there.
Okay, thank you. Let me see, there's a couple more. This is a good question, very practical. Do very small businesses have to file?
Good question. So I would assume that as a corporation, if you are incorporated or your partnership, that you would have to file if you have an interest in land. We can check to see if there are any exemptions under the act, but I would assume that you would have to file.
Okay, thank you. And this is along those lines. What if you have a business that stores your products at home? So you're not really operating the business out of the home, but maybe you have a big room that you store stock in, and so it's still you claim that space in your home as part of your office. How does that gray area get treated?
So we would want to see who actually owns the property. So if the business owns the property, then this report might be required. But if it's just an individual owning that property and the business doesn't have an interest in land, then you won't be required to file a report. If there is some sort of lease agreement between the corporation in terms of the property, then again, you might be going into the realm of having to file a report. So it's really a focus on that ownership in land. Who owns the land is generally the one that has to file if they fall under one of those categories of reporting bodies.
Okay, thank you. And I think this was a rhetorical question, but it's a good one. Small home-based business needs to pay the cost of a lawyer to determine whether they need to file. But I'll let you respond to that, because it's a very practical point, but maybe through your presentation, this person won't have to go, and they could do the analysis themselves. But I'll let you answer that question.
Yeah, so I mean, we definitely sympathize about the expense, but as I said, this is the BC government's response to trying to tackle the issue of money laundering. Vancouver's notorious for having issues in terms of real estate and money laundering. So what they're trying to do is have this accessibility and disclosure to see what's going on in the background. So it is an additional requirement that, adds time and expense, but it's the government's way of trying to help combat a major issue.
So adding on that, this is a question I have. What kind of expenses should people expect for the legal work? There's the cost for making the determination of whether you have to comply with this, and then there's the cost to actually prepare and submit the report. What are people looking at? Is it like a couple $100, a couple thousand, 50,000? What should they expect to get from a lawyer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it really depends on how much is going to have to be in the report. So if you do have interest holders and you're required to get that additional information from 50 shareholders, this is going to add to the expense of filing the report. However, if it's just a simple report where there are no interest holders, I would estimate that, lawyers' fees will probably be around, well, I'll say under $1,000.
Okay, thank you. And then this is an interesting one. Do the owners of a strata lot need to file if it's their only residence, or does the strata corporation need to file a report?
Yeah, that's a great question. So generally, they'd be looking at the overall entity. So they'd be looking at the strata. However, there are exemptions under the act. So a strata corporation is not required to file.
And then I have another question. Is there some type of whistleblower mechanism where if people know that somebody filed a report and made material misrepresentations on it, is there any way that just average citizens can report it to whatever part of the provincial government is regulating this?
I would assume that they could reach out to the LOTR or the administrator and voice their concerns, but since we haven't even gotten to the deadline for filing the reports, I would imagine that there will be more information available after the deadline in terms of, how this plays out in terms of enforceability and fines.
So there's a couple other people seem pretty fired up over this. There's a lot of interesting discussion. But here's another question. A non-for-profit or a registered charity, let's see, I do have a board of directors, but they have no interest in our real estate holdings. We have no partners. Do we file?
So if the land is owned by, say, if you are a society and you do own the land or you have a lease from the municipality, you might be required to file. And so you'd be looking at who in the society has the right to have an interest in terms of voting, any sort of share distribution, things like that, in order to assess whether there are any interest holders.
Okay, so we have another question. Does the 10-year of the lease include options to renew?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So generally, they're just looking at the term. And if there is an option to renew and say the lease is renewed, at that point in time, you might be required to file a report. But if you're under the 10 years as of now, you're not required to file. So as I said, this is an existing obligation that's going to continue on. So if you do have changes in your land ownership, like extending your lease, then that's going to be applicable in filing any future reports.
Okay, thank you. Okay, does everybody, there's a lot of passionate reactions to the new legislation. Do you know if there's like if the government's still accepting like feedback from citizens about this, or is this set in stone already?
Well, it's pretty set in stone as we have the deadline to file the report by November of next year. But I mean, it probably doesn't hurt to reach out to the LOTR with any concerns that they may have.
Oh, yes. Some people are pointing out there's questions in the Q&A. Sorry, everyone. I'm not used to being the host on a Zoom call. Okay, here we go. I think that one you answered already. No, this one, okay. Do you expect that many, if any, BC co-ops I think, wait, this one you addressed. We'll need to file the LOTR reports. Do they need to collect and send in members' personal information? I think you answered that already, right?
Yes, so just the membership list, seeing how many members you have.
And for the leases of 10 years, include the right to renew. I think you addressed that.
Yes, I think it did. So if there is the opportunity to renew, that's not relevant if it's under 10 years, but if it does get renewed, then you'll have to consider filing a report in the future.
And here's an interesting question. If mom is on the title, I guess as a guarantor, because the bank insisted, do I still have to file a report?
So this report is in terms of mostly corporate entities. So if it's your personal name, then that's not going to be a requirement for you to file this report. It's really looking at corporations, trusts, societies, co-ops, anybody that can have multiple interest holders, and having that ownership broken down so that if you do have a co-op, it's not giving you the full picture of who has rights and who has interest. And so what the government's trying to do is see those individuals underneath that corporate name and seeing what kinds of interests they have and whether that is a concern or not.
So it sounds like it's to shed light on a person who's actually behind a corporate veil.
Exactly, yeah. So having more transparency on the corporate side, more bodies that are incorporated, not individuals holding ownership in a house or land.
Yeah. Okay. Here's another interesting question. What would most societies say in their filing? Usually no one owns 10%, nor has the ability to appoint directors, only at the annual general meeting.
Yes, so if that's the case and you don't have any interest holders, all you have to do is write a statement indicating same. So generally we say that the certifiers, the individuals who sign the report at the end, they have reviewed the materials of the society and they can confirm that there are no interest holders.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have some other questions. Let's see, where does co-housing fit in? Or what about condo owners for whom their strata lot is not a primary residence, but instead is run as a VRBO or Airbnb business? Are they exempt?
So it depends what kind of land interest it is. So with stratas, there may be an exemption. If a corporation holds interest in land, then you're probably going to have to file a report. So it's probably best just to check in with a lawyer to see whether the specifics of your case would apply with regards to an exemption under the act, or if you would be required to file.
Okay. Okay, I see there's a lot of discussion. Oh, good. What about a combination of apartments, some Airbnb with renters and regular apartments? We have a mixed use.
Yeah, so with regards to Airbnb, it depends on who owns the property. So if you do have a corporation owning the property, you might be required to file a report. But if it's under an individual's name, then you probably won't have to file a report. So it really depends what's on title.
Yeah, it seems to be a reoccurring theme. Always look to see who's on title, period.
That's right.
Okay. Okay, does anybody else have any questions for Samantha? There's some great discussion too. I definitely encourage people to follow up with their MLA if they're not happy about this. Okay, well, if we don't have any more questions, oh, I see. Is that? Oh. Okay, I don't think we have any more questions, but thank you so much, Samantha, for delivering this seminar. I mean, I didn't know anything about this area, and I definitely would call you if I have any questions, because I don't practice in this area at all. But this is really informative, and it'll be interesting to see how it rolls out once it's, once it's set in motion. But if anybody has any, oh, sorry.
Oh, no problem.
Okay, great. So if anybody has any follow-up questions, feel free to contact Cleo. We're going to put some of these resources on our website, and maybe take some of our questions here and make a frequently asked questions list for people to refer to in the future. And if you need any further advice, you're always welcome to contact Samantha anytime. And she put her contact information on the slides, so you can either write it down or just download it when we upload it on the website. Okay, so if nobody has any more questions, have a wonderful day and an even better week. Stay healthy.